So, Professor Smith, what have you for us today?
Well, thank you. And it's such a beautiful day here in South Carolina. As I was working on this study, I tell you what, I think the hardest part was coming up for a title for it. And I at first I had this mouthful, and it went like this: a multidisciplinary approach to a cohesive community. Wow, a mouthful. And I thought to myself at the end of it, that's just too much. Or in the words of a teen that we have here locally, she likes to say to me sometimes, that's too extra. That's extra. Have you ever heard that from the teenagers nowadays? That's extra when they say that. So I asked the Father, how can I frame this in a way that people can understand and just communicate my heart? Because really what I'd like to present today is sort of some of my experiences and how the Father has shown me over 2 decades in ministry, over 2 decades. I think about 1995 is when I began to really begin to develop ministry-wise. And what I finally was led to was the title of this teaching is Bringing It All Together. Bringing It All Together. I thought that sounded a little better. Bringing It All Together. And so what I'd like to sort of start out with here is in my years in various assemblies, I've been associated with mostly Hebraic kinds of assemblies since 1995, when we keep the Sabbath, keep Passover, and so on. And in all of those different experiences, there's so many different opinions about what the scriptures teach. I mean, we all have virtually the same scriptures, and this is before I came to know about these other books like the Clementine homilies and so on, these things that I've been exposed to in the Yahad. But to have the same scriptures and yet even a passage to have so many different opinions about what it's communicating, and then to see so many people fall out over different aspects of a doctrine, and in reality, when you think about the larger picture, it does little to affect the function of the assembly of Elohim. In other words, these minor issues. And, it's one thing to fall out over doctrines, that are clearly not representative of either the Torah or the testimony of Yahushua. There are some biggies that we have to sort of gather around and be united around these principles, and we have to defend them. But you see, all too often, we find that we are caught up in the moment of an exchange that reduces itself to argument for argument's sake. Put it that way. Now, there's a quality. I don't know if any of you have ever heard this word. It's called Aristic. Heuristic. E-R-I-S-T-I-C. Heuristic. And if you love to argue, you're Aristic. Okay, that's you. Being Aristic is pretty much a common quality, let's say, for a debater to have. Politicians, they pretty much all of them have it. They have to be somewhat Aristic to be able to prove their point and so on. All too often, theologians tend to be a little bit on the heuristic side. Heuristic describes things that have to do with an argument or simply the tendency to debate, especially when someone loves to win an argument, okay? And values that are more highly than arriving at the truth, okay? Now we're speaking of the worldly aspect of it, the worldly aspect. The person doing the arguing can also be called Aristic. For example, quote, "It makes me mad when that Aristic wins his debates with his false arguments." And it comes, unquote. And the Greek word is eris, strife or discord. And I have to tell you, in the first decade, and I will say even the second decade of 2 decades, I have been sort of thrown into the gauntlet of sorts, especially online. And I think all of you experienced this, where people are debating one thing or another. And all too often I've succumbed. But there was a pivotal moment. I had it's funny, I had this online discussion with this individual. I don't even know really who they were, but they quoted this thing from the Clementine homilies. And I tell you what, it hit me like a hammer, the way that Peter responded about this subject. And I'll probably discuss that down the road a little more, but I want to sort of develop this a little more, this idea of heuristic. It also, if you look at the dictionary, it's given to disputation for its own sake, often employing specious arguments, heuristical argumentation, given to or characterized by argument. A noun, a person who disputes, who is good at or enjoys controversy. Okay. Now, as I'm describing this, think of perhaps a character in the Clementine homilies, perhaps that imbibes this. Synonyms: controversialist, disputant, the art of logical disputation, especially specious type of artistry, prowess. Well, if you go to the Ivy League schools, the whole world is designed. In other words, the higher echelon of societies in the Ivy League. Have you ever heard of classes called rhetoric? Rhetoric. Okay, you'll only see these in the Ivy League schools where they literally practice this. Okay, the skill, this art. As a spirit, it is a superior skill in the worldly way of looking at it that you can learn by study and practice and observation. And now, as far as arguing one way or another, we see that even the apostles, there's a spirit by which this can be done. It can be done either by the spirit of the world, or the words can be given you by the Ruach HaKodesh in proving what? In proving the truth and bringing the truth out. And so it can be a kind of used for good or ill if you look at it from a personality standpoint. In the book of Acts, we see Stephen. He is, I wouldn't use the term disputing, but he's teaching. He's teaching the validity of Yahushua as Messiah against the Jews' denials of him. The Jews were throwing themselves left and right at him to try to discredit him. And in this case, Stephen had this ability to bring out truth in a powerful way. And this is in Acts chapter 6, verses 8 through 10. And Stephen, full of power, of faith and power, okay, did great wonders and miracles among the people. Then there arose certain of the synagogue, which is called the synagogue of the Libertines, and the Cyrenians, and the Alexandrians. They all gathered together against this guy. And of them of Cilicia and of Asia, and they all came and they began to dispute with Stephen, okay? And, but they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which Stephen spoke, okay? That's in Acts chapter 6, verse 8 through 10. Now, those of us that are put in those places, and I don't know if you've ever been in a place, and I think probably everyone in here has been in a position where the Father gave you a word that brought truth out, that just, the clouds just kind of went away, and you could tell it was by the Spirit. It wasn't out of the flesh. Far too often, people that tend to get into this heuristic quality tend to be enticed to work in the flesh. Okay, that's the downside of this. But it says in Luke 12:12 that the set-apart Spirit shall teach you in the same hour what you ought to say. However, more times than often, and I'm going to refer to the Clementine homilies now, more times than often, people and I will even confess to you myself, in this number, succumb to this at various times, where they resort to the old nature, like Simon Magus in his debates with Peter, the apostle, in the Clementine homilies. And if you read those back and forth, it's just incredible what's going on. But debate for debate's sake is clearly something that's in the flesh. Something that's in the flesh. And I didn't really come to this until later in life to understand this, because I was raised in an educational home. My dad was a teacher, school teacher. My mom was a school teacher. My stepfather was a professor. All his kids were professors, okay, in the same university. And you have to be able to talk about ideas to be in that role, okay? And so it just came naturally. But it is very much seducing in the flesh when the truth is involved. When the truth is involved. And so if you can read this for yourself in the Clementine homilies, here is Simon Magus, and he's debating for debate's sake. You can see how he's trying to win at any cost. He's using every low-down, dirty rhetorical trick in the book just to, quote, win in the ears of the hearers. And regardless of the truth, which Peter is bringing out, he's bringing out witnesses, he's bringing out testimony, regardless of the truth, which is oftentimes lost in the process. So this this kind of brings up sort of a story that I came across a while ago. And I don't know if you've ever heard the story of the four blind men, okay? It's a story, it's kind of a parable, and it originated in an ancient Indian subcontinent where it was widely taught. Basically, it's a story of a group of blind men who have, there's four of them usually traditionally, four of these blind men who have never come across an elephant before and who learn and conceptualize what the elephant is like by touching it. For example, let me see if I can give you sort of a visual aid to this. Okay, so there they are. There they are. Okay, let me get this out of the way. Okay, so here's these four blind men. They're all touching various parts of this elephant, okay? And they're coming up with concepts, ideas about what this is, okay? And now, as they go about doing this, let's see if we can, get down here to my, okay, so as they go about doing this, each blind man feels a different part of the elephant's body, but only one part, such as the side or the tusk. They then describe the elephant based on their limited experience, and their descriptions of the elephant are different from each other. In some versions, they come to suspect that the other person is dishonest, and they come to blows. The moral of the parable is that humans have a tendency to claim absolute truth based on their limited subjective experience, as they ignore other people's limited subjective experiences, which may have equal validity in a way, okay? Now, this also reminded me, this concept kind of is sort of referenced in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. And here's what it says. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. Okay, this is the Apostle Paul. He's discoursing, and he is talking about, he comes to this conclusion: I see through a glass darkly. In other words, the Father gives us things of understanding. We have a concept of what what this is all about, this faith that we walk in. And he might give different giftings and different ideas to other people, but the spirit of truth that's working in us, that's connecting us, should allow us to have the humility to be humble and to be open-minded with our brothers and sisters. And this is also, I think, in the motto of the Yahad, unity and diversity. Unity and diversity. All of that's inculcated in that as well. Let me bring this stop share now. Okay. So, now, what did I want to sort of bring out here is, speaking of everyone having different gifts and abilities, this is in 1 Corinthians 13. And it says, though I speak with the tongues of men and angels and have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass or as a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have not charity or love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profits me nothing. Okay, so what are some of the qualities of love? Consideration, charity. Charity suffers long. It's kind. Charity envies not. Charity doesn't boast itself. It's not puffed up. It does not behave itself unseemly. It doesn't seek their own. It's not easily provoked. And it thinks no evil. Wow, that's a tough one in our day and age, isn't it? To cultivate that purity in our mind. Thinks no evil. What's the first thing that happens in the flesh? If something that we think adverse is happening to us, we tend to want to point the finger out and say, oh, wait a minute, they've got some scheme against me. No, it thinks no evil. It rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, it believes all things, it hopes all things, it endures all things. Charity never fails, but where there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there shall be knowledge, shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. Everyone has a picture, remember? The 4 blind guys. We know in part and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. The Master Yahushua is the one who has it all together. He's got all the answers. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now, here it is, for now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And here's the summation that he's making here. And now, so what's the bottom line? So what remains? Now what remains is faith, hope, and charity. These 3. But the greatest of these is charity or love. Really, love in action. That's what we're talking about here. Love in action, not just in word. Okay. So when you think about this spirit that we're supposed to be operating in, not just the spirit of truth, but the spirit of love and humility, that takes time to cultivate on a spiritual level. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a proper doctrine, because, I would have some people say to me in response to this, well, wait a minute here. There's a right way and there's a wrong way to look at Scripture. That may be true, but guess what? You might not have all the pieces. The Father might not have given you as an individual all the pieces. Therefore, that's why we have the assembly. That's why we have the Yahad, because someone else might have a piece, might be able to see something on that elephant that you can't see. In fact, if you really study Scripture, you'll find out the Scripture has a lot of layers. It's kind of like an onion. You ever taken an onion? It's got peels upon peels upon peels upon peels. There is a way of describing this the House of Judah, the sages of the House of Judah have a way, and they call it with an acronym parties. Okay, and I think I brought this up before, but I wanted to show you some examples really quickly here. Some of you may be familiar with this, but the acronym starts out with Peshat. That means that when we look at the scripture, the surface, this is the straight or literal direct meaning, okay? Then you have, that's the P, then you have the R, which is the remez, which means it's hints or the deep allegoric, hidden, or symbolic meaning beyond just the literal sense. It just kind of hints. It hints to something, okay, beyond that physical. Then you have the D, P-R-D, drash, from the Hebrew drash, meaning to inquire or seek. And it's the comparative meaning as given through similar occurrences. It's also called midrash, meaning concept. This is a teaching or exposition or application of the Peshat or the remez. In some cases, this could be considered comparable to a sermon. A sermon, just like what I'm doing here. I'm expounding. I'm bringing out concepts from scriptures. For instance, biblical writers may take two or more unrelated verses and combine them to create a verse with a third meaning. In other words, taking different scriptures and extrapolating understanding out of it. Finally, we have the S, P-R-D-S, sod, pronounced with a long O as in lore, and it means secret or mystery, or the esoteric mystical meaning as given through inspiration or revelation. So what are some examples? Okay, so like the surface, the Peshat. John 11:35, Yahushua wept. Remember, after Lazarus passed away, Yahushua wept. He loved Lazarus. That's literal. Yahushua wept. What about the hint, the remez, in Matthew chapter 2:15? How about this? Out of Egypt I called my son. Well, if you go to Hosea chapter 11:1, that Matthew is applying to Yahushua. Okay, interesting. But if we stick to the literal understanding of that, it's a reference to Israel being called out of Egypt. And so someone who is an absolute abject literalist might think, wait a minute, that's not, Matthew's not looking at that correctly. But he is, because Messiah is it's hinting toward the Messiah in this particular discourse. It's hinting a remez at the relationship between Israel and the Messiah in this and other verses he uses. What about a allegorical drash, a concept? How about Matthew 18:18? Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Okay, I'm going to go into that a little bit more detail, but it has to do with the community, two or three coming together, two or three, perhaps elders, whatever they are, that are part of that community, and praying and coming up with solutions, and the Father puts a stamp of approval on that. Okay, then we have the sod, Matthew 26:28, which is kind of the mystical. Then he took the cup, gave thanks. This is Matthew 26:28. Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood. Taken literally, this verse would not only be a violation of Torah commandment against consuming blood, but along with other verses about eating Yahushua's flesh, John 6:51-56, would be grounds for accusations of cannibalism. But guess what? There's a far deeper and more mystical meaning here. However, the sod, even one of those who heard him did not understand, the sod, rather. Remember when Yahushua said that in the Gospels? He lost a lot of people because they were not thinking spiritually. They were not thinking on that higher level. Okay? So how do we take these approaches and encourage and build an assembly? How do we develop a cohesive, workable doctrine that allows the congregation to develop and be best suited for productive evangelism locally and abroad? Okay. So that's a question as we go through some of these concepts, and part of it is looking at the various gifts of individuals. The part of it is having a spirit of humility and still honoring the truth and realizing that everyone has these pieces, these parts that they have, that's been revealed to them, and it all comes together. Now, this is interesting in Matthew chapter 18, 15 through 20. This is where we get this idea of whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Let me give some context here. Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against you, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. And if he shall hear you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear you, then take with you one or two others, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it to the assembly, tell it to the Yahad. But if he neglects to hear the Yahad, let him be unto you as a heathen man and a publican. In other words, he's no longer part of the Yahad until he repents. Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And then he goes on to give a little more meat to this bone, to the bones here. He's building this idea, this concept. Again, I say to you that if 2 of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. Okay? So what can we conceptualize out of this? Well, how about this idea that when you have 2 or 3 come together, you have a Yahad, you have a board, you have people who are anointed to come together and pray and seek these answers. You begin to gain consensus on matters not specifically written in scriptures or in a way of interpretation. You come together with agreement. And this then gives us a way to be able to sort of come up with this manner of faith, for example, on calendar issues, how the assembly manages the different ministry workings of men and women. You know that calendar issues are very, very, I would say there's a lot of people out there that hold very strong, but each assembly, if you're applying this concept, then you are narrowing down for your assembly the calendar issues, how you manage different ministry workings of men and women, how to handle disputes, political challenges, example, the Q, something that struck us recently and is still affecting us, and many other issues. And also, if you follow this kind of concept, you can avoid extremism inherent in so many different groups. Extremism. Now, you know what I'm talking about when I say extremism in the Hebrew roots movement, don't you? You've got the folks over here who say eating meat, you're going to take in devils. You got the folks over here, who say women can't even talk in the assembly. You got the folks here and there, and it's extremism. And so you can avoid that by following this kind of concept, this kind of method of developing the assembly. And we can find the balance and avoid the minimalist lies. Like, I don't like to pick on the Amish, but think of the Amish today. I love the Amish. They make the greatest maple syrup. I used to get gallons of that in Michigan for $20 a gallon. Wow. Anyway, but they have rejected nearly everything modern, as well as maintain the piety. In other words, we can maintain the piety the scriptures describe, which lead to godly lives. We don't have to be like the Amish. We don't have to be like those who won't even allow women to speak in the assembly. Extremism. We can come out of that, and we can begin to form a more perfect body of believers. Now, here's another concept that the Father has been working with me over the years. And this is, and I think I may have discussed this before, you cannot go it alone. Okay, you've got gifts. You've got a ministry. You've got, understanding on certain things. But guess what? You still can't go it alone. You have to develop the skills and abilities of people around you. You have to learn to pass the torch so that the younger generation is equipped. The one-man show is short-sighted in Yah's communities. This is why we see in the Clementine homilies, we see in the book of Acts, we see in all of the epistles, we see the apostles helping the younger generation along, teaching, developing them for ministry. And that's also part of the mission of the Yahad. And I believe that we're uniquely suited for that here in the Yahad because of the continuing education, because of the development of each person's abilities. Continuing discipleship and fostering the innate skills in each individual is important toward this end. Where do we get this concept? Exodus chapter 18, 1 through 27. Okay, remember Moses, by the spirit and power of Elohim, brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. And here he is, he's sitting in his judgment chair, and he has a line longer than a Russian bread line. And from sun up to sundown, people are coming to him saying, hey, this person did this to me, that person did this. How do we do this? How do we do this? And he is wearing himself out. Well, it says here that Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that Yahuwah had done for Moses, for his people Israel, how the master had brought Israel out of Egypt after Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah. His father-in-law, Jethro, took her back along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been an alien in a foreign land, and the name of the other, Eleazar, for he said, the El of my fathers was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came into the wilderness where Moses was encamped at the mountain of Yahuwah, bringing Moses' sons and wife to him. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare, and they went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the master had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had beset them on the way, and how the master had delivered them. Jethro rejoiced for all the good that Yahuwah had done to Israel and delivering them from the Egyptians. Jethro said, blessed be the master who has delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh. Now I know that the master is greater than all Elohim because he delivered the people from the Egyptians when they dealt arrogantly with them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifice to Yahuwah. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of Elohim. Okay, so here it is. So this is the context. The next day, Moses sat as judge for the people, while the people stood around him from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw that all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone while all the people stand around you from morning until evening? Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of Elohim. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known to them the statutes and instructions of Elohim. Moses' father-in-law said to him, what you're doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. You cannot do it alone, my friends. Remember that. Now listen to me, I will give you counsel, and Yahuwah be with you. You should represent the people before Elohim, and you should bring their cases before Elohim. Teach them the statutes and instructions. Here's discipleship right here. Teaching, developing skills and abilities, and make known to them the way they are to go and the things that they are to do. You should also look for able men among all the people, men who fear Yahuwah, are trustworthy and hate dishonest gain. You got to find people that have integrity, okay? Let them sit as judges for the people at all times. Let them bring every important case to you, but decide every minor case for themselves. So it'll be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, and Yahuwah so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will go to their home in peace. We want the faith to endure. We want the faith to perpetuate. We want to be able to hand the torch to the next generation. And you have to do this. This concept of assemblies, the health, bringing about the health of assemblies, you've got to have this discipleship and developing. So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men from all Israel and anointed them as heads over the people, as officers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And they judged the people at all times. Hard cases they brought to Moses, but any minor case they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went off to his own country. Okay, so what can we get out of this? Here it is. A good and balanced assembly understands the concepts of discipleship, learning how to stir up your gift. In other words, don't shrink back and think you don't have anything to offer Yahuwah. You have a lot to offer, but you got to take the step forward. You've got to trust him to operate through you. You've got to you got to take that first step into the Red Sea, and the ways will part for you. Trust me. Trust me. When you begin to operate in your gift, the Spirit of Yahushua will begin to move through you. You begin to stir up that gift, as Paul says to Timothy. Stir up that gift that is within you and begin to operate in it. Okay, so I'm getting close to my time here. Let me just add this one thing here, this other concept, okay? Also, a good and balanced assembly knows how to discern the strengths and gifts of each member and encourage them to use them. And let me tell you something. I've gone through a lot of churches and a lot of assemblies and a lot of Hebraic groups, whatever you want to call them. And it's not often encouraged in many churches or assemblies. Usually you have just one or two operating. But look at this pattern that's given to us in 2 Corinthians 12. Now there are diversities of gifts, but the same ruach, or spirit. There are differences of administrations, but the same master. There are diversities of operations, but it is the same Elohim which works all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man to profit everyone. For to one is given by the Spirit the word of wisdom, to another the word of knowledge by the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the same Spirit, to another working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But all these gifts work through that one and self-same Spirit. We're talking about the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of Elohim, dividing to every man severally as he will. He gives out freely. He gives it to you. You have gifts inside of you. Many of you perhaps have never began to operate in those gifts, and I want to encourage you to begin to operate in those gifts. For as the body is one and hath many members, and all the members of that one body, being many, are as one body, so also is Messiah. For by one Spirit we are all baptized into one body, whether we be Jews or of the house of Israel, or even Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, and have been all made to drink into one Spirit. So here is the attitude now that we need to keep with regard to gifts and the operation of gifts. For the body is not one member, but many. If the foot shall say, because I am not the hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear shall say, because it is not the eye, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? If the whole body were an eye, where were the hearing? If the whole body were hearing, where were the smelling? But now hath Yahuwah set the members, every one of them, in the body, as it hath pleased him. He's the one who determines what your gift is. It's your part to stir up that gift and begin to operate it. And if they were all one member, where was the body? But now are they many members, yet but one body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you, No, much more those members of the body which seem to be more feeble are necessary. They fulfill a function. And guess what? It's an important function in Yah's kingdom. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon those we bestow even more abundant honor. Honor even what appears in the flesh to be the smaller things. Honor them, lift them up, encourage them, so that they stir up those gifts the more and more. And our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness, for our comely parts have no need, for Yahuwah hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to that part which lacked, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. Wow, there's a concept. If you know a brother or sister that's hurting, guess what? Suffer with him or her. Suffer in prayer. Lift them up. Gather around them. Encourage them. Give them words of hope. Be with them in some way. Okay? Suffer with them. If one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. Okay. Now, he concludes here. Now you are the body of Messiah and members in particular. Okay. All right, so I'm coming to the end here. I'd like to encourage you and challenge you. One of the most important things that you'll have to develop as you grow in your ministry is developing not just an open mind, but a humility to look at different ideas about this faith. Okay, and as I've grown and developed, the unity and diversity is important. It is critical to building out an assembly that really begins to have flesh on it. Now, this is in Romans chapter 12, 1 through 12. And I'll finish with this as an encouragement to all of you. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of Elohim, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, kadosh and acceptable to Yahuwah, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of Elohim, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So I encourage you today, discern, test, reach out to Elohim, develop your gifts, stir up that gift that is within you. All of us are important, critically important in the kingdom of Elohim. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I think that's the best sermon I've ever heard.